In his 1520 address on Christian liberty, Luther wrote these words: "A Christian man is the most free Lord of all and subject to none. A Christian man is the most dutiful servant of all and subject to everyone." Such is the paradox of the Christian journey. Here's a definition of paradox, of literary paradox, that I like, and I believe true to the intent of Luther as he reflects the teachings of Paul and Jesus. The paradox as literary device has been defined as an anomalous juxtaposition of incongruous ideas for the sake of striking exposition or unorthodox insight. It functions as a method of literary analysis which involves examining apparently contradictory statements and drawing conclusions either to reconcile them or to explain their presence. These words are about lining up apparent opposing ideas for the sake of soul-stretching examination of what we believe and how it is that we live. They are about coming to insights that otherwise might be overlooked. And coming to new insights is part and parcel of the journey of faith with Jesus, isn't it? The difference between a sacred journey and a trip is this. A trip is simply about getting from point A to point B. A faith journey or sacred pilgrimage is about what happens on the way and in between. Luke has told his story of Jesus' life such that the most well-beloved parables and teaching moments of Jesus are placed between the time that Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem until he accomplishes his mission there. Said differently, what's most important is what takes place along the way. The journey of faith is not about arrival. Luke is actually never explicit after saying that Jesus had set his face towards Jerusalem. He's never actually explicit about the moment that Jesus arrives. Now, there's a paradox. But rather, he emphasizes all the teaching that happens along the way. The teaching once he arrived, his sacrificial action, and then his ongoing mission that is carried in the hearts of the disciples as they continue their journey with Christ and his Spirit within them beyond the borders of Jerusalem and into the broader world. The ultimate destination of Jesus is not Jerusalem, but rather deeper into the heart of the mission of the kingdom of God that he carried in his heart all the while he was on the way. There's another paradox, in case you're keeping count. The same is true for us. Yes, I quote, want to go to heaven someday, but the truth is that the kingdom of heaven has come down to meet us in the good news of Jesus. We are set free from working to, quote, get there, because there has come to meet us and set us free to walk deeper into it, even as we are on our journey towards it. How we do this journey is always in relationship to others, others who share our faith and those who don't, others who are our friends and those who are strangers or even enemies. How we do this journey is in relationship with the self we recognize and the self that sometimes shocks or surprises us as we discover it while we're on the way, if we are paying attention. How we do this is in relationship with all the demands of social pressures and expectations and our true and deepest core values. How we do this journey with Jesus is in relationship with the genuine desires of our heart's true passions and those ignoble thirsts that make us less than fully alive in relationship with God himself and others. Christ calls us to follow him. He frees us from the tyranny of any man-made or religious law. He calls us into a set of new and renewing relationships. No longer is church a place to which we must go, It becomes a community into which Jesus calls us and with whom we gather. And with this insight, the mission of the church is not so much about saving people from something as it is about calling them into renewing relationships that beckon them forth from old tombs into new life. You do get the Jesus connection there, right? Little wonder that Jesus, walking into the territory of the Samaritans, those avowed despisers of the Jews, refused the request of the disciples to call down fire on them, but simply led them deeper on the journey into the sacrificial love of God that would make itself known in Jerusalem and beyond. In this sense, those disciples who are free among all men are called by Jesus, in the words of Luther, to be servants of all people. And so are we. Where others demand and accuse, we are free and must proclaim the gospel that sets us free. Where human need is recognized, we are free to respond as servants who kneel with Jesus to wash the feet of humanity, to refresh others who are weary on life's journey. This freedom is paradoxical. It has no easy or simple answers. Well, that won't surprise you coming from this pastor now, will it? It frees us to search our hearts for our motives and motivates our hearts by inviting us to do what ultimately makes all parties most whole, ourselves and others. It is not reckless about faith, saying that God will take care of poverty or ecological disaster. Yet it invites sleep that rests self and world safely in God when one has done all that they possibly can and the day is now spent. This faith scandalizes self-congratulating pietism that also has deep compassion for those self-righteous folks when all goes to worms. Such faith just can't seem to remember to say, "I told you so." As I consider Jesus, I see the paradox of the Son of God, the master of all creation that's become the servant of all that he has created. I see that ascent to the cross of death, lifted there at the hands of humanity, is also Jesus' willing ascent to his throne, from which grace flows down, and compassion and embrace. And it is this Christ who has called us out of all those social and religious conventions that keep us from being alive to God and to self and to others. Rather, through the paradox of dying to them, he gives us back our lives, raised to new life. It is the same Christ that calls us today to walk ever more surely into the depths of the mystery of the kingdom of God, even as we make our way from point A to point B. And it is the same Christ who calls us to be his kingdom's paradoxical reflections of reuniting grace in the midst of the world's hostile contradictions. In the name of God's paradoxical love incarnate,